Imagine two rooms. These two rooms are filled with renowned chemistry researchers. Both rooms are giving a sample from an unknown material found in space. In one room, everybody's from the same country, same ethnicity, same gender, similar socioeconomic background. They all have the same education. On the other room, we find scientists with a mix of backgrounds and identities. US-born, immigrants, women, men, LGBTQ+, different ethnicities, some who study in schools like the ones where I teach, other ones that come from smaller institutions. After a few months, both groups of researchers submit their findings for publication. Did they study the same properties of this unknown material? Did they reach the same conclusions? Did they even ask the same questions? Those who trust the objectivity of the scientific endeavor will argue that eventually the outcome from the two rooms has to be the same. In my experience, that couldn't be farther from the truth. As scientists, we like to claim objectivity because that gives us a level of certainty that accompanies the truth. If an answer is objective, there is no room for personal opinion, interpretation, or bias. I am here to challenge the notion that science is fully objective, or more importantly, that it needs to be fully objective. Scientific knowledge is driven by humans, and as such, it is the differences in our backgrounds and identity that shape the lens through which we observe and conduct the science. As humans, we get to decide what scientific queries to pursue, what questions to ask, and what experiments and observations to propose. We convince ourselves that we can ask any potential question, we can propose any potential experiment. In reality, even when we think that we choose what to explore, that exploration path has already been colored by our experience. We are bound by our location, our upbringing, and our environment. This baggage, together with the existing technologies and resource constraints, molds the way in which we propose and carry out the science. For example, the difference in wealth distribution in different regions of the world skew the evolution of scientific knowledge. Wealthy countries get to decide how and where to allocate the research money. This freedom is more constrained in poor countries where resources are limited. This disparity can lead to scientific knowledge that depends where the research was performed. Consider the following problem in ecology. We want to use all our shared scientific knowledge to develop a conservation policy for wildfowl, duck, geese, and swan. We would like to believe that with enough time, we can gather all scientific data and develop an objective and thorough understanding of the problem. Wouldn't it be nice if that's how it worked? Alas, it is not. In 2016, Beth Roberts, a Ph.D. student in ecology, and her coworkers did a meta-study of all the scientific publications between the years 1911 and 2010 on the worldwide wildfowl populations. The results paint a very different picture. 90% of the research output for duck, geese, and swan corresponded to species found in North America and Europe alone. Of the 21 species for which there are no studies at all, 19 of them are found in South America and Asia. Data from wealthy countries contributed to 90% of the research output, whereas low-income countries contributed with about 0.1%. Guess on which of those regions we find the species in most need of our protection. Now, why does it matter? It matters because if we assume that science produces objective and unbiased knowledge, we are overlooking some serious issues. Economic constraint leads to geographical bias. And it is only by acknowledging those biases that we can develop an accurate scientific model that fully defines the problem and help us find the solutions. Now, these biases are not just economic or geographical. When I go into my lab and try to design a new experiment, sustainable energy materials, I bring with me my scientific knowledge, but also my very own perspective. A perspective that is the product of my upbringing, my culture, my particular education. It is I who get to ask the questions. It is I who gets to perform the experiments. And those questions and those experiments would be different if instead of I, it were you. The advancement of scientific knowledge is interdependent with those who perform it. As a Latina scientist, I am constantly aware of my existence in a non-Hispanic, male-dominated environment. When I was a graduate student, I would go to conferences and I could count the number of senior female scientists with the fingers of one hand. What this skewed demographics taught me is that the questions being posed and the conversations generated in a co-ed room are far different from those of a single gender room. Now, I get to travel to conferences all over the world. And I notice that when the makeup of the participant changes, so do the questions being asked. An international conference in, let's say, Colombia, with a majority of Latin American scientists, has a different flavor than an international conference in Atlanta with a majority of US scientists. In 2017, over half of the PhDs in chemical engineering and over a third of the PhDs in chemistry earned in the US were not born here. These scientists come from all over the world and bring with them an assorted collection of experiences, of interest, of knowledges, of questions to ask. The vast majority of them completed their college education immersed in their native culture. And it is the full spectrum of those different upbringings that provides much of the creativity that we find today on our academic and scientific communities. Their cultural identities play a role in the way they observe, they think, they analyze, they conduct science. These young scholars are also at the forefront of education. They are teaching in the classrooms. They are mentoring students. It is the full diversity of their cultures that feeds and enhances the education of our rising scientists. I was one of these young scientists that came from abroad. I was born in Argentina, and in my native country we have a saying, lo atamos con alambre, which translates roughly to, we can fix it with duct tape. In reality, what it means is that we have no choice but to look for solutions that are cheap and creative to solve any problem. This is more of a mental framework than just a saying. And this approach affects the way that I tackle any problem. When I was in graduate school, I used to be known as the creative student who could think outside the box and cheaply fix the unfixable. My advisor could not understand from where I would come up with these wild ideas. But I knew that the true culprit of my creativity was my immigrant cultural upbringing. Now, as a senior researcher and a chemistry professor, my cultural identity guides the way that I perform my science, the way that I educate young researchers and students on how to do and think about science. I had the opportunity to develop a course to teach science to non-science majors. And I decided to teach chemistry through the lens of my culture. And what is more central to the Latinx culture than our food? We take pride in our national dishes, even though sometimes you might find the same dish in a different country. But our relationship with food goes way beyond ingredients and recipes. It includes how we share our food, how we prepare our feasts, how long do we sit at the table, even at what time we have our meals. At Sunday 3 p.m. lunch, a weekday 9 p.m. dinner, those are standard eating times for Argentinians. Together with a colleague, we team up to create a course called Chemistry en la Cocina Latina. This course brings together science with the Hispanic culture. In the laboratory and in the kitchen, we let students explore the connections between cooking and chemistry, all through the lens of Latin food and Spanish language. My own experience as an immigrant, a Latina, and a scientist gives me a unique perspective from where to teach this course. And to the students taking the course, learning chemistry from a Latina, an immigrant, and scientist gives them a unique opportunity to enrich their education experience. I've been in the US long enough that what I call my culture, it's a mishmash of customs. No soy de aquí, ni soy de allá. I'm not from here, nor from there. As an immigrant, I have the license to pick and choose what I like and to discard what I don't like from my native and adopted communities. This melange of cultures and identities set the stage in which I perform my science. It enriches its language, and it provides a more diverse, polychromatic viewpoint to advance scientific knowledge. Who we are permeates what we do. And even if we try to convince ourselves that science is neutral, that science is objective, that science is unbiased, it is not. This is not something that we can or we need to change. Acknowledging the influence of our identity and background in our science enriches its growth and improves our understanding of nature and the universe. In the past few minutes, I hope to have shown you that science and the human perspective are intertwined, that how we pose the questions and how we approach the solutions are not only based on rigid scientific tenets, but are also influenced by what we have experienced and who we are as human beings. So, do not remove yourself, embrace it. Don't ever be afraid to ask any questions. There is not just a unique and neutral way to study science. Use your identity to your advantage and go and discover whatever it makes you, you. And in doing so, keep in mind those two rooms and ask yourself in which one you'd rather be.